Well, hi there, it's Sandy, and today we're going to do something really artsy-fartsy, but we're going to use a stencil to help us get started watercoloring some poppies. And this is a series of videos. Right now it's 2, we'll see if it goes further. This particular one I'm going to do on cold press watercolor paper. This is like get in the art store kind of thing, and I have brushes. They're 2, 4, 6, and 8 Grumbacher brushes as far as the size. And I switch back and forth between them, but the size of the brush is not nearly as important as what you do with it. So I am using penny black stencils for both of these watercolor videos, and maybe I'll be doing something more with them or with other flower watercolorings. I don't really know. But for right now it's a series of 2. And I've traced the stencil and added just a few lines. I'm doing this at real time, so if you want to go get the stencil and then try this yourself, you can just go step by step through it. If you want to use the distress watercolor paper, which is what I normally use for my card making watercoloring, then you can certainly do that. You'll get a little different texture than I'm getting here. So you can see there's definitely like this kind of cross-hatching strange thing going on. That's because of the paper. So I am starting, this is going to be a really red poppy, so I'm starting by just filling the whole poppy with color first. It's going to be a really rich, dark poppy, because that's what poppies are. They're usually really intense colors. So I wanted to add a lot of color layers to it. So the first layer is going to be reds. I have first the light pinky red, and now I'm going in with a warmer red, and just layering them and letting the colors just blend as they wish. I didn't pre-wet the paper on this, so if you're wondering, I did not do that, so I'm doing wet on dry paper for this particular flower. And just mushing the color around a little bit, dab it and get the worst of it off. I'm gonna dab it again because I wasn't happy with how much dabbing I had done, and now I'm gonna just let it dry for a while. And I'm gonna work on the stems of the flowers. And I love this green. It kind of reminds me of my YG9 series in my Copic markers, because it's a very natural looking green instead of being a bright kind of garish sort of color. But I'm at the tops of the strokes, I'm kind of using more paint and then less at the bottom. I'm trying to figure out how I'm describing what I'm doing or what I was doing while I painted this. It's a little bit tough to go back in your mind and go, what was I thinking? So I'm kind of starting with the more of the color at the top, and then as the brush runs out of color at the bottom, it gets softer. So I get this kind of a wash look even in the stems themselves. I wanted to add a little bit of color to the little poppy buds, or whatever these are. I did look online for pictures of poppies, and these are indeed what they look like, the little stemmy things. So I thought that was interesting. I always wondered what they actually looked like, so I googled it. I'm going to start on the background while everything else works on drying, and I wanted a couple of rich blues and purples in the background. And I'm doing a real washy watercolor look in this background. And this is something that's not super easy to achieve, but it's possible. So I'm just letting organic shapes flow out of my brush. And I'm going to try as much as I can to make it look as though this watercolor background was painted behind the flowers. You can use some sort of masking fluid to achieve this. And to do that, you would paint, before you started, do your pencil work, and then paint your masking fluid over top of all of the flowers and the stems. Then you can watercolor wash everything like mad and get crazy with it, and go right across those stems without any of that paint getting underneath of that masking fluid. But this is just a different way to do it, and I didn't feel like getting out all that masking fluid and dealing with all that. So I'm painting organic shapes that some of them have hard edges, some of them have soft edges. They just kind of have a mix of both, and I wanted it to feel really loose and artsy. Some folks like to make their watercolor go out to a square because they picture a frame around it or the card that it's going to go on, but I just like leaving that white space and allowing these washy watercolor shapes to just drift off. Now, I'm not really good at making them the way that I want them to be, but I'm getting better at it. Practice is definitely helping quite a bit. So I'm just adding some water to try to soften those edges, because when they get really hard, I don't like that quite so much. And I want it to feel like it's fading off into that blue sky up there. So I'm just going to work in a little bit more of the blues. I'm going to drag some of that color down to the bottom. And I don't want a whole lot, so I'm not going to put the dark blue down there. Just the light blue colors down in the bottom section. And again, I'm going to try to make them look like they're crossing right over top of the stems, or right behind the stems, by continuing those organic shapes from one to another and allowing that paint to just kind of drag across the card. And here's where I'm going to start adding some splotches, because, you know, paintings look more artsy, I guess, when they have splotches. I'm not sure what the science is behind splotches, but as I have a little bit of extra paint here and there on the brush, I'm just going to leave a few spots. Those are going to add detail to it instead of being just the blobs. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think seeing on a painting, when you see some edges that are hard edges and some that are soft, I think that adds more detail. Like these little dots that I'm adding just by picking up paint with my finger from those wet areas is just adding detail to look at. And it just keeps it from being just a plain old boring paint wash. And if you dab it with your finger that way, you do end up with more control over where you're going to put those dots. But if you want to test them out on a scratch paper and see how dark they're going to be, if you pull that paint out with your finger, you might want to do that. They're also less spotty spots. They're a little softer when you do it with your finger that way. If it does come out too hard, you can always just add a drop of water over top of it and dab it up as well, and that will soften those spots a little bit. So I've mixed more colors in that dark area to really darken it up, because that's going to draw more attention to the poppy. And I'm just going to add a little bit of that dark blue at the top, not much, but just right around that lip of the flower. And that lip then ends up being really highlighted because it's got all that extra color right behind it. So now I'm going to go back and work into the poppy, since it's pretty much dry, and I'm putting some shadows inside the flower. These poppies have little veins that go up the leaves that way, up the petals. So I'm just going to add them, and I'm being fairly loose with it. Don't get real rigid and mechanical, because then they don't end up looking real. Well, not that it's real, it's looking like a painting, but I want it to look enough like a flower that people really read it that way when they look at it. And then I'm adding dark color underneath of these petals in the very front, because those would be in shadow if the light was coming up from the top. So I'm just going to add dark underneath each of the edges of those flowers. And I'm leaving, you can tell, a little lip right at the top of those front petals, and that is like a highlight that you'll be able to see, so it'll give some definition to those very, very front petals. Okay, and I'm constantly rinsing my brush out as I switch between colors, because I want to make sure I don't contaminate too much. So now I'm going to take this really dark purple. I tested it out on the palette just to make sure, and I want to kind of give the center a little bit of a base, and I ended up coloring over this by the time I was done, but it gave me a little more color from the inside into the flower itself by coloring that, because these flowers have black centers to them. So I just wanted a little bit of darker color that would kind of stretch out into the flower itself beyond where the black is going to be in the center. I decided to heat set it so that it would dry quicker and I could get moving on the final steps on this one. So I used my heat gun, and now I'm just going to put the black in the center. And you can leave a little bit of highlights in there, but when you look at these flowers, those centers are pretty black. And I really wanted the contrast and the pop of that center black. And I'm just going to let some little wiggly lines be the little detail part on that, because that's what they look like in real life. So it's just about done here, and I was surprisingly pleased with how it came out. I don't usually have that happen when I start doing a painting like this, but I'm starting to really enjoy my watercolors a whole lot more. I decided to add just a little tiny bit of detail to those other flowers as well. And just a little tiny splash. And just on the left side, I didn't put a whole lot on the right side, just a little tiny bit on the left so that it'll add some detail without distracting too much. And you can almost see my mind thinking as my brush is going across a bunch of different areas trying to figure out what the heck I'm going to do next. Because I did want to add, you know me, I always have to do that last little detail. It's like the little Bob Ross in me or something, not really sure. So I wanted to give some strength to these petals in the front and create some extra shadow underneath of them. It got too dark, so I just dabbed it off and was fairly happy with how it came out. Beyond that, so here is the finished one. I just stamped a sentiment on it and put it on a black card base, leaving a strip on both sides. Really easy design and simple. And links for all the supplies used in this video can be found in the doobly-doo down below. These Koi watercolors are just becoming my very best friend. Here are links to more in this floral watercolor series. I don't know how many there's going to be, but we will see how it goes over time because I'm really enjoying watercolor. Take care, and I will talk to you guys later. Have a really fabulous day. Bye-bye.